And welcome back into the Add 10 Gallons Concrete Podcast. We have an esteemed guest with us, Mr. Ramy Sedra from the great state of Canada. Oh, sorry. They're not a state. I apologize. That was terrible of me. I'm so sorry. From the wonderful country, neighbors to the north, Canada. Mr. Ramy, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, guys. Happy to be on.
No, I appreciate you taking that joke so well. Don't sick your dog on me there. Hopefully Marley's having a good day.
Yeah, all 11 pounds of her, she'll lick your hat.
Not to start the conversation on a sad note, we had to put our dog down earlier this year, and actually, I'm looking forward to getting another one. So I'm trying to look forward. It was very sad to lose Edie, but with the next one, and we're having an internal debate in our house whether or not to get a big dog or a small dog. Where do you fall on that, Mr. Ramy, given that you have this 11, protector of the realm?
Well, I think it's actually kind of a lose-lose. So I went from German Shepherds to a miniature Schnauzer, and my German Shepherd was convinced that he was a small dog. And, he would like try and sit on your lap and curl up, and you've got like this 100-pound beast on you. And you're like, buddy, like there's absolutely nothing small. And now I've got this like 11, 12-pound miniature Schnauzer that is convinced, like she's terrifying everybody. So I think it's a lose-lose, buddy. Like whatever you get, they've all got their little quirks.
Joe, you've got two dogs, one big, one small, right?
Yeah, I've got all ends of the spectrum, of every spectrum. I've got a big black one. I've got a small little one. The big black one is nice. The small little white one is not. But the good thing about having a big dog, I think, is, they just sound mean. Like Moose is he's like 62 pounds. He's a standard poodle. He wouldn't harm a fly. But to hear him bark, like if somebody comes up in the driveway, like whoever would think somebody was going to eat them alive if they came into this house. So that is the benefit of having a big dog. And the little dog, it's like, you can punt that thing across the room if you were to break into the house. I don't know. I think I'm leaning more team big dog in this conversation.
Ramy, I hate to make this conversation go sidetracked so quickly, but I'm absolutely derailing us for just a moment. Joey, your wife sent me a photograph the other day that you have a new pet in your house. You have a lizard of some kind. Do you care to explain why on earth you now have a lizard in your house?
So long story short, so we went to Hawaii the second week of March, and we had a stowaway returning from Hawaii. So we rented an Airbnb. There was a big crowd of us, so we had stuff in the pantry that wasn't going to go bad. And I had a cooler that I had flown with us because I was going hunting, and so we had a bunch of food stuff in the cooler on the way back. And we got back, super late, actually like 2:00 Sunday morning. And so Sunday afternoon, my wife's unpacking everything. We're putting stuff away in the pantry and what have you. And there's this Ziploc bag. I forget what was even in it. It was like honey or something like that. And she opens the bag and gets the honey out, and there is a gecko in this Ziploc bag that somehow had miraculously stayed alive from Friday afternoon when we packed up everything. It was a sealed Ziploc bag. This thing stayed alive from then, 2 plane rides from Hawaii to Nashville, and it lasted throughout the day Sunday and miraculously was still alive come Sunday afternoon. So my immediate thought is like, okay, this is a lizard. We have lizards. I was going to dump the thing outside. So I set it in the flower bed. Well, of course, it was like 40-something degrees that day. Lizard didn't go nowhere. Lizard just sitting there because lizards don't do well in 40-something degree weather. Right. And so, of course, my kids start talking about it. The kids start talking about it. Wife starts talking about it. We end up keeping the lizard. So we make a trip to PetSmart that afternoon, get like this reptile owner starter kit, the tank, a fake rock. I don't know what all else. I don't know what we've spent on this stupid lizard that's about the size of my pinky. But yeah, we now have a gecko, and her name is Gabs. So I'm one of those reptile people now, apparently.
Ramy, you didn't know what you were getting into, but welcome to Add 10 Gallons Concrete Podcast.
I was not expecting this. But, the funny thing is, so my parents were school teachers, and at the end of the school year, my dad comes home with a goldfish that they were, going to get rid of in the science lab. So my dad comes home with it and he's like, oh, got you a goldfish. I'm all excited. I stick it in an empty plastic ice cream tub because I figured this thing's going to last like a week, right? Set it down on the living room floor because I thought, that's a great place to put a fish, right? Is on the floor in the living room. And so everything's going on hunky dory until Shivas, who's my German Shepherd, decides one day, he wants to get some fish and chips action going. And I wasn't paying attention. I come back and I find a puddle of water in the living room. And I'm like, geez, what's that puddle of water? Did the dog pee? Is there like a mess? And then I realize, oh, the ice cream container is like in the corner somewhere. And the fish is just like dead. Like, oh, geez, that's it. Take the fish, about to throw it in the toilet. And as I'm about to throw it in the toilet, it starts wiggling. Like, oh my God, this thing's a fighter. Put it back in the ice cream tub, it's alive. I said, geez, this thing's a real fighter. So I went to the pet store, got like a real proper, little fishbowl thing. That thing lasted like a year and a half. So my point is, Joey, you're in for a long haul because
Oh,
that
yeah.
gecko is going to be a real fighter. It's going to survive. If it can live, through luggage,
Oh, yeah.
now you've got it this luxury condo set up. It's going to be
Yep.
with you for a while, buddy.
Oh, my luck, it's got some kind of Galapagos tortoise gene in it, and it's going to live for like 120 years. That's exactly how my luck's going to go.
Well, speaking of hundreds of years, it's actually was going to be one of the cruxes of this conversation today. So, one of the things we definitely want to dive into here pretty quickly that Ramy pointed out when we met him is the vast amount of knowledge that's disappearing from the trades. And this is a concrete show, so he's also focused on concrete, and so we're really going to focus on concrete construction. But some of the stats he gave out were pretty alarming. And before we jump into that, Ram, do you mind just let the people know where you work now and kind of, you're a bit of a newcomer to the industry, a couple years in. But so what's your background and what made you decide to cross over onto the dark side?
Sure, the dark side. I love it. Well, I'm at C60, so I'm the CEO at C60. And, C60 in a nutshell is, a company that's focused on helping ready-mix producers improve the performance of their business. And so, we've got a bunch of different software tools that, we offer the industry, but the focus is really around, hey, where are you leaking profit margin? Right? Where's your margin leaking and why are you leaking that margin? And using your data to basically pinpoint what can you do about it, right? So the way I think in analogies, guys, so you'll probably hear me use lots of analogies. It's just the way my mind works. But I think about it almost like in football terms, right? So it's like, if it's the first play and the first quarter, and you already can figure out why the team's not doing so well, like what mistakes are they making, you can kind of forecast the outcome of the game. And if I can tell you as a coach, right, like, hey, what are the plays you need to change the outcome of the game, then I'm giving you a fighting chance to make that outcome better for you as a football team. And so it's kind of, we're applying kind of the same logic, right, using data from a producer to basically help them, course correct. That's kind of what we do. And, I'm new to the industry, so, please take what I say with a grain of salt because I don't pretend to like know everything about ready mix. I've been in the industry for about 3 years now, and I've worked primarily in a whole bunch of other industries. So I spent the last almost 30 years building, software businesses in data and analytics in a variety of different industries. And, I've worked in government, I've worked in, public safety. So think law enforcement and, counterterrorism, believe it or not. I've worked in airlines and, very supply chain logistics heavy businesses and using data. So, that's kind of my career span has been in those other industries. And, so I'm kind of bringing that perspective to ReadyMix. I've surrounded myself with folks that really know ReadyMix, but you asked a question of like, why ReadyMix? Why this industry? And I find like one of the things, and we'll get into maybe how I got into the industry, but one of the things I find really interesting about ReadyMix is that It's a lot more technical than I think people outside the industry realize. It's a lot more complex. When I talk to my friends or family about, hey, I'm working in ready mix, they just think of like mud coming out of a truck, and they don't really realize the engineering that goes into it, the complexity of the business, how fast things operate. And those are all kind of characteristics that really appeal to me about the industry. And the other thing that really appealed to me is I think there's opportunity because there's not yet, a lot of digital adoption, right? Like we we in this industry tend to do things the way we've done them for a long time. And that's not necessarily bad, right? Because it's like knowledge that we've passed over from one generation to another. But I think there's opportunity. And so that's kind of, why I came to ReadyMix.
Yeah, in other spaces, not just in other industries, the idea of digitization, modernization, it all sounds really nice, but you kind of have to have a whole of cloth changeover. There's not a lot of factories that were built in the 1920s that just incrementally seem to iterate and become a little bit more automated and a little bit more automated. You sort of see like these wholesale changes. And in the concrete space, the margins just aren't big enough to be, you know what, let me just scrap this plant and I'll just sink CapEx into something brand new and automate in ways that have never been done before. Those are all massive risks in the space. It's very litigious space, big contracts, nothing's it's interesting that the materials can be inexpensive for each ingredient, but the sum of the whole is quite expensive. If you have to redo a project for any reason, I mean, you might as well just kiss the month's profits goodbye. So, really tough business to come into and say, let me just change everything we're doing, even if it's for the better. So with that sort of setup, you're welcome to contradict that if you've experienced something different. But with that setup, as you start to have these conversations with folks about what it is that you like to see, and you say, "Hey, I have these other experiences. There is another way to do this. We should talk about these other ways." What's your response from folks generally?
Well, it's a great question. And, I think you have to also be grounded, right? Like the people in this business, if you think about a producer that's third or fourth generation, they've got a lot of experience, right? And to be the newcomer coming in and say, well, hey, this is how we do it in the airline business or how we do it in retail. I'll use the term, it's a little arrogant, right? It's like, so I think you got to start from a place of let's understand the producer that we're talking to, right? Let's understand their business. Let's understand their priorities, right? What are they trying to accomplish? And then kind of work backwards and say, okay, well, based on the problems they're solving, is there a playbook, right, of something similar that's been done in another industry that they can use as a safe way, right? And I really want to emphasize the word safe, right? Because we're a pretty conservative industry, right? We don't like to take risks on unknown stuff, and digital in our industry is pretty unknown still, right? We're still figuring it out, right? So how do we take those safe kind of measured steps? And so that's kind of like how I approach it. But I would tell you that in my view, there's I think of this like there's two kind of big macro, things that are kind of happening in the industry that I encourage producers to think about, and whether it's happening in their business or not, I think it's case by case. The first you talked about, Paul, which is like, for every four people leaving the industry, one new entrant. And, we're basically trading, folks with like 20 plus years of tenure, right, and experience to folks that are 2.5, 3 years of tenure, right? And so you got this massive knowledge drain that's happening on one hand. And if it's 4-1, right, four leaving, one coming in, obviously those numbers are telling you we're not hiring enough to catch up, right? Like our business, our industry is growing, but we're bleeding talent. I think that's the one macro that from a talent perspective and productivity is a concern. I think the other is when you compare ready mix to other industries, we invest on average about 1% of our revenues on digital innovation. Other industries, more advanced industries, are anywhere between 4 to 6%. So I think there's kind of like a question there to say, okay, well, what are you going to do as a producer to close the gap? If you're losing talent and that's impacting productivity, are you investing in things that are going to, fill the void?
Or is it even possible? I think immediately think of two questions. One, why is the gap there? There may be a perfectly fine reason that says I don't need to be investing that much in technology. So why does that gap exist? So what are the differences in those industries? And then number two, can that job even be filled by automation? We were just having a conversation before this podcast started about truck drivers and uh, about how some can drive stick shifts and some can't. And the four of us here on this podcast, we're all taught to drive sticks as our first vehicles. And what a difference that makes, because you never, for whatever reason, you just never forget how to do it. Go years and years and years without doing it. And it's like riding a bike. But back to your point about automation or digitization, it's going to be very difficult to automate a truck driver. And you say, so if we extrapolate that, say, well, if you're operating a ready-mix concrete plant, how many employees do you have at that plant on average? And what percentage of those guys are truck drivers? It's a pretty high percentage. It's going to be tough. So just trying to say, why haven't we digitized? Why aren't we automated? Why are we not investing as much? Maybe there's not as much to invest in, or maybe there is something to invest in, and you can sort of clue us in this conversation about why is there a gap and what should we be looking to invest in.
You raise a really good question. And yeah, I don't think we're at a point today where you're gonna digitize a truck driver in the sense of replacing the driver, right? But are there tools that you can use to make that driver more productive, right? And I know this is a controversial thing, but like at least it's controversial sometimes when I talk to customers. But I think that the sort of the what good looks like in North America is, hey, 2.5 turns of a truck a day, right? Other parts of the world, that number's quite bigger, and so how do they get it to be bigger is through digital, right? Using optimization, using different tools, right? To make the driver more productive. And so I would tend to believe that, you're not going to remove humans from the equation, but how do we help people be more bionic, right? How do we get more out of them? I think about salespeople, right? Or, salespeople that want to have a conversation with, technical managers, right? QC folks. And geez, well, there's fewer and fewer of those, right? Well, can you chat with an AI, right? Or an agentic tool, right? That gives you some feedback like a technical services manager. Not going to replace them, but maybe you're handling 50% of the load. And so now you're making your salespeople more productive because they're getting that, right? So I think it's less about replacing people and more about finding the tools, to make the people that you have more productive, right? And, without making it more productive, sometimes you say making them more productive and people say, well, geez, now I just got to work longer hours.
Or do two people's jobs.
Or do two people's jobs.
Well, let's steel man your argument for just a moment. So a great example, an actual already implemented example, is tracking of the trucks. The customer now only if they download some ready mix companies have apps, and if you order concrete from them, even if you don't place it on the app, they'll assign the truck that it's loaded into. You can actually watch on the app where your truck is based on the GPS location of that app, of the truck in the app. And so you can see how many phone calls were being made prior to that app to the plant saying, where's the truck? Where's the truck? Where's the truck? That could be half the phone calls you get in a day. So that would be a great example of the way digitization is freeing folks up to do the things that are more important while also providing better customer service. The thing that you touched on before when we spoke, and I really want to bring it to the podcast, is the number of years of knowledge that are being lost in the industry every single year. It's like, I forget how many. It was like millions of years, or thousands of, hundreds of thousands of years of knowledge. Some crazy number that just really blew my mind, and I'm not sure how we replace that knowledge. And I'm not sure I've spent since the time we first spoke about that to now, I've been trying to think. I wanted to come here with like, oh, maybe we have a solution, maybe there's an idea. I don't know what that idea is. What do we do?
Well, I think, it's a multi-layered problem, right? And I think the example I was sharing with you guys last time was, I was talking to one of our customers and they were telling us, hey, last year we lost 750 years of experience to retirement. This year we'll lose 600. And they were giving the example of the average tenure of the people they're losing versus the people they're hiring, or the newbies they're kind of stepping up. And it's that big contrast of like 20 years to 2.5, 3 years, right? And so that's a massive knowledge gap. And I was working with another customer, and we were doing, it was interesting. We were doing a workshop with them on, getting ready to train people on our system. And through that workshop, they were educating me on their 5-year kind of hiring plan. And what was really interesting is they were kind of forecasting their growth and forecasting how many people are retiring and leaving. And then, they're doing very aggressive hiring in a bunch of areas, like non-traditional sectors. They're doing things like trying to bring in more women in the industry, bringing in women from, roles in industry where I think, driving being a concrete delivery professional is a more appealing career opportunity than kind of some of the traditional roles that they're filling. So really doing, they're tackling this. It's not all digital, right? Is my point, is that there's some very practical alternative means to fill that gap, right? They're trying to bring in the talent, benefits planning. So they're doing things to bring in the gap. But on a 5-year kind of like forecast, right? There's still about 10 to 15% in terms of labor effort short, right? When they think about like, what's the growth going to look like for their business? What's the attrition? And what's the hiring and kind of, ramp up curve on that talent pool? They're still about 15% short. So, and I think it's important to really put that in perspective, because then this isn't only about digital. And I would hate folks to kind of listen to this conversation and say, geez, it's all like, you can't fix everything with digital. But that 15 to 20%, well, how do you shore that up, right? Can you increase a turn on your trucks? Can you trade unprofitable yards for more profitable yards, right? That funds now investment in more digital, right? Can you automate things like building a forecast, right? That you were doing manually, right? And now, because you can't hire enough office folks, and hiring more overhead isn't a great answer, right? So how do you automate and make that function leaner? How do you partner differently with your customers, right? If you're unproductive delivering the concrete, chances are your customer that has 10 times more labor on the job site than you do is that's costing them a lot more. So how are you exposing that information to your customer and helping them be more productive? Now all of a sudden you're a value add. And if you're a value add, does that prompt for better pricing? Right? So I think all of these things combined bridge the gap, but I don't think, at least my opinion is, I don't think it's just one thing that solves it.
Yeah, I think most of the conversations Joey and I have had in this show lead us to believe it's never going to be just one thing. There's no magical silver bullet out there. But I do want to go back to this discrepancy, this gap between our industry and the other maybe similar industries. You didn't really touch on which industry specifically, but there is a gap in investment. And in the most generous terms toward ready mix, why wouldn't they be investing in these other tools and solutions? I was trying to think this in generous terms. So I don't want to we love ready mix. So it's not here to bash it. Trying to think in generous terms. What might be that reason that we're not doing that as a group?
Well, I think there's probably a number, but I do think the tides are shifting, right? I think like the what is it, winds of change, right, are here. I don't know where we are in the movie, if it's the beginning of the movie but it's early in the movie, right? Um, why folks, I think necessity is the mother of all invention, right? Like if you're doing well, if you're making money, you know, you've improved on granddad's recipe of how to run the business. you've innovated and bought new trucks, and like I really love. There's this study by the NRMCA, right? They do this benchmarking every year, and there's a great presentation that gets presented about the benchmarks. And I forget exactly, but a few years ago, a lot of ready mix producers doubled down and invested in trucks, right? They bought new assets and they invested in those assets, and I think that was like a level of innovation that they brought in. So I don't think ready mix producers are not doing anything. I think they are, right? But that's a traditional lever. And I think now, right, they've, I won't say run out of traditional levers, but I think they need to look to new ones. Say, okay, well, I've got modernized my plants, I've got new trucks, I've got, I've got the tools I need mechanically. Well, where can I squeeze the lemon, right? What's the next wave to squeeze the lemon? And I think that's where now there's an opportunity to start looking at data, at advanced analytics, and being more data driven about how to get more out of the lemon. So I think it's kind of been this progression over the years. The other thing that I think is contributing to why things are changing is new generations. Lots of the businesses that I talk to, maybe it's the same for you guys. I'd love to get your perspective, but there's generations that are now stepping in to take over the business from mom and dad, right? Or, I've seen some younger guys now getting into the industry, and they're onto their third, fourth plant that they're building, and they're bringing a fresh perspective, right? They're used to having everything on their phone. And so the way they want to operate and what their expectation of how you run a business is very different. I think those are things that are contributing to the shift.
Business.
So, being a new guy in the industry, I was trying to internalize, I think in analogies, right? So I was trying to internalize so I could get the business model. And I hope to God I'm not offending any producers listening to this. So, at one point it just clicked, and I said, geez, ready mix is like the pizza business in so far as the pizza business, the constraint in the pizza business is not how many pizzas you can make, right? You can always make as many pizzas as you want in a restaurant. It's how many you can deliver. And you're only going to make money if you deliver the pizza, right? And like the pizza business, what you put on the pizza, the ingredients, the recipe, that's a differentiator, right? And that dictates kind of what you're going to charge and whether the pizza's profitable or not. And, like the pizza business, if you want to scale, well, you need multiple locations, right? You can only serve kind of a certain geography and so on. And concrete is perishable, like a pizza. Pizza's perishable, right? So when I started to get my head around this industry, I started to realize, there's a lot of similarities between the pizza business and the ready mix business. And you could argue that a pizza, well, individually, one delivery at a time, it's not massive margins, right? It's just like the pizza business, just like concrete. And that helped me do two things. I think the first is internalize and kind of understand as a newbie to the industry, the business model. The second thing is it dawned on me and said, well, if the pizza business can go from a relatively standard way of operating, right? Traditional way of operating. And now if you think of the bigger chains, like I think of, Domino's, for example, which is a great case study, and how Domino's has doubled down on digital. And as Domino's doubled down on digital and almost, Domino's took it probably, further, right? They're probably like the extreme case, but they've really doubled down. And, I think, I forget the latest statistic, but I think it's like 85% of their sales comes in through digital channel, right? And they've got their app, track where my pizza is, and, they optimize recipes and they optimize pricing based on recipes and so on. So they've gone kind of the extra, but they really double down. And like the concrete business at one point, were very low investors in digital relative to sales. And today, right, they're much higher, right? They're like the more traditional retailers, et cetera, than that 4 to 6% investment in digital, but took a relatively traditional business, right? Pizza, and double down on digital created much more productivity for themselves, much more opportunity. And that really took dominoes from, they were in a bad place financially. And now they're like a leader in their sector. So for me, and I'll pause here for a sec, guys, but I guess, the point I'm making is that, we have an opportunity in ready mix that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can actually, inspire ourselves from some of these other industries that have solved some of the very similar logistics and sales channel challenges and, mix optimization, challenges that we face in our industry. They've been solved not exactly the same way, but close enough that we can take inspiration from that and I think bring it into our industry at low risk. And we've seen the proof points that if we do that, right, like, hey, if the pizza business can skyrocket with the right investments, lots of smart people in ready mix, I'm sure we could do the same.
Well, you got fans of technology here on the show. So 3 of our last 4 interviews have been centered around technology in this business. As you were talking, it sort of dawned on me that I think the reason you don't see that investment in the digitization is mainly due to folks not being exposed to the power of the either data or the power of being able to manipulate and use data or the power to use software as a way to advance their business. And I give an example here for Joey. Joey and I have been doing mixed design since about 2007. Now, from 2007 to probably 2012, we were pretty terrible at it. But once you get a few years under your belt of designing mixes and seeing how things change as you change different ingredients, proportion, weather, and people start to impact the mix, you get an idea of why concrete behaves the way it behaves. But even as many mixed designs as we had done, probably around 2018 or 2019, we were first introduced to something called the tarantula curve. And there was a very powerful formula that was put together by Dr. Tyler Lay. And when that tool was introduced, even to someone like Joey, who'd been in the business for more than 10 years and had been designing mixes from scratch on the back of a piece of paper, and could tell you the ins and outs of how concrete worked. That tool, it's a digital tool. It's just a spreadsheet, but it is a digital tool. But that changed the way you do mix designs. Am I right, Joey?
No, excuse me, absolutely. And especially when we're dealing with Actigel and how Actigel affects the mix. We can plug the mix into this tarantula curve and it can fall within the boundaries of a workable mix, a workable conventional concrete mix within the tarantula curve. And then knowing what Actigel does to a mix, I know that if I plug a mix into this tarantula curve and there are a couple things, kind of out of that threshold of a workable mix, Actigel can alleviate or make up for some of that stuff that's out of spec. Like, when we're dealing with manufactured sand or gradations of, certain aggregates or just whatever, that's how the tarantula curve is working. It takes, gradations of the various aggregates that you have in a mix and couple that with the cement and the water amount, water cement ratio and paste and all these other things. And it just has this threshold of a workable mix. And it just has a couple boxes programmed into this sheet. Like, according to all of this information that we plugged in there with the gradations and whatnot, will this mix pump? Will this mix perform in slip form? I forget what all other parameters are in there, but yeah, it put on paper what you couldn't see in a conventional mix design that just had the list of ingredients. It allowed you to see on paper whether or not the mix could perform under certain circumstances.
And even that tool, even though it's just a spreadsheet and it's not perfect, but it gives you more insight so that you can make better decisions going forward. And I think that is the analogy that I'm trying to make here. That if it can work for somebody like Joey, who probably doesn't like being referred to as an expert, but find me guys who've made more mixed designs in more places with as many different types of material as he has. It's a very short list of people, and when he's been doing it for 20 years. So sorry, Joe, I'm gonna put you as an expert in making mix designs. And if you can be introduced to a digital tool that simple that can elevate your game and make you better at what you're doing, I could easily see that there must be tools out there that I'm probably not aware of, almost certainly not aware of, that would help in the batching of concrete and make that more streamlined, the delivery of the concrete, the proportioning of the concrete, and whatever kind of sales and customer service and technical support that also goes on the back end. And if we can see an improvement, I think the question would become for me if I was a business owner would be what percentage of improvement could an industry like a ready mix industry, or should a company like a ready mix company make through digitization efforts? Rami, do you have any stats, any knowledge, any insight that you could share of how
Well,
much people can typically improve when they start doing this?
I mean, I guess I'll start to say, like, I totally agree with you. I think and there's so many use cases. Like, and we could talk about all the different use cases. Um, so I can share some stats. So when we look at what I call our class of 2024, so that's the producers that we onboarded on our platform at C60 last year. We think of like our graduates, hand them little diplomas and say thank you. So out of those producers, and there's probably around 14 different areas in the business that C60 analyzes. Okay, so it's not everything in the business. Okay. And we try and focus on where are they leaking margin. Okay. So and maybe I'll take a public service announcement and explain what I mean by that. Okay. So
Yeah, please,
if
please.
you sold a yard of concrete, for $10, you were expecting to make $3 in margin. Okay. But for whatever, operational reasons, somebody, held your truck longer, or, somebody leaned and put a little extra powder in that mix because it wanted to flow better. Well, instead of making $3, you eroded that, right? You leaked margin and you made $1, right? And so what we do is we measure where are you leaking? What's the number? What's the amount of that leakage? Right? Based on all of these like different inefficiencies. So when we look at our class of 2024, right, the average leakage was about $7 a yard. That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. Yeah, that's way higher
Mm-hmm.
than I thought you were gonna say.
So it's not like that's not what the recovery rate is, right? Like how much of that can you make back? That's going to vary by producer. But what's interesting about the ability to use digital to do that is you can get it's your data as a producer, right? But you get very granular on certain things. You get very granular on statuses. You get very granular on costing every single ticket dynamically. You get very granular on, hey, geez, am I yielding these mixes correctly? And, these tiny errors in material usage, right? Well, in aggregate, what is it costing you? And now, instead of looking backwards, you're forecasting and you're saying, okay, well, you're forecasting now these little errors that seem like you can just ignore them when you're working with laws of averages, right? Hey, average travel time and, average cost of per hour of my truck. And instead of using averages, when you get granular and very specific, because you can do that with digital, you can't do that by hand. It's hard, right? And so when you get that level of specificity, big numbers,
Yeah,
right?
well, I mean, even if it's costing you $100 in materials to make that yard of concrete, and you're losing seven of it through inefficiency, I mean, I think most producers, they'll not just in ready mix but any industry, is going to factor in a couple percentage points of just loss for whatever the reason is, whether it's rejected materials or inefficiencies or what have you. But $7, that's a
And
lot.
that's money, that's money that the producer intended on making,
Mm-hmm.
right? This isn't like, we're not talking about, hey, we're trying to improve their selling price. We're talking about, hey, I was expecting to make this as part of my margin. And because I'm doing all kinds of things or things are happening in my business, it's not always the producer is doing stuff. Sometimes it's customer behavior, right? And well, that behavior has an impact on your profitability. And so if you can see that, if you can see where it's coming from, then you can see the cost drivers and you can actually act on them. You can say, okay, well, I'm going to go change. I'm going to go talk to dispatch because now I could see that this customer is costing me, $20 a yard more to service than the next guy. Well, geez, it's because my waiting time to unload on these types of jobs that I do with this customer is significantly longer. I can go have a conversation with my dispatch and just tweak that and say, well, when we're doing these kinds of jobs and there's this kind of a pump on this job, well, you don't go with their standard spacing. You change the spacing. And these are just regular, everyday operational things that a producer can do. And that's putting money back in their pocket. And I think that's where, Paul, to your example, is like, it's not a revolutionary thing, but it's just being able to see the impact of these things. I think that's where the magic is, because like today, what are they doing? Is like they're going to collect this data in a spreadsheet and try to figure it out. It's a lot of work.
It is. It's interesting that we have a business that has as much information in it as we do, but as much data as there is, and it's all just been hand collected for forever. No, just forever. It was always just handwritten tickets, handwritten notes, handwritten formulations. Nothing was digitized. So it's interesting that you're coming into this space, but I don't know if we really got into why. So why, after all these years of being in these other industries, why make the leap over here? I don't know if I really understood why you saw it. Just because you saw that, like, hey, there's an opportunity to change the business, you want to leave a big impact. Maybe you could explain that a little further for me.
Sure. Well, maybe I'll kind of rewind the clock. So my background, right, as I was telling you, is spent my career in analytics. Built different analytics businesses. And back in 2014, I sold a business to PricewaterhouseCoopers or PwC. Went there as a partner, helped them build their AI and advanced analytics business, and then after that, I built another AI and supply chain. It's like an innovation accelerator. So we were kind of partnering with industry, startups, academia, and government funding. And we raised close to $1 billion in this ecosystem to build, help companies innovate and drive, AI and supply chain. And that was an amazing experience. And I was missing I wanted to go back into business, and I wanted to start a new business, and I was looking for an opportunity. And one of my former partners at PwC recruited me to go to McKinsey, which is that big global management consulting firm. And at McKinsey, I was responsible for a business practice. And what I found really interesting was, so I was responsible. It's kind of like an entrepreneur in residence. And so my job was basically to partner with customers that were in legacy industries and build new digital businesses around AI and advanced analytics, which was kind of like my thing, right? And I started working with construction, engineering, construction. I wanted to pick industry or industries that, were under digitized. It's like, because to go do something in banking for me wasn't going to be exciting because it's like lots has been done, right? And the other thing I was looking for was an industry where there was going to be a human challenge. There was going to be some resistance, right? It's like, hey, this stuff is new, and the best part of the job is like to meet the people and to educate them and to show them what this stuff can do, and almost like see the wonder in their eyes of like, oh man, this is really cool, right? So I was doing that, and that's actually how I got exposed to concrete. I started working with a company called Heidelberg Materials and looking to help them solve, how to optimize the ready mix business. And the challenge for them is that, they're this like integrated cement and concrete producer, and they've got ready mix, all kinds of different levels of maturity of those businesses all around the world. And so that's how I got exposed to ready mix. And it was kind of funny because when they were looking for someone to partner with and team up to kind of figure this out, they were looking for somebody that was an entrepreneur, right, in their past life, built like software businesses in data and analytics. Okay, well, I checked those two boxes, and knew something about ready mix. And I didn't know a lot about ready mix, but I spent 3.5 years working at Lafarge doing optimization of kilns and fuel for kilns and stuff. So they were like, well, close enough. So we're like, I don't think we're going to find anybody else that checks these boxes.
Yeah, tough.
And
That's a tough cross section to hit.
um, And yeah, and that's how I got exposed to it. And honestly, like once I started kind of getting familiar with the industry, I loved it because it's supply chain centric, which is like right up my alley. I started seeing patterns. It was like, it's a good thing and a bad thing, guys, like pattern recognition because it's biased, right? Like you make a lot of assumptions. And that's what I was saying. Like I take it with a grain of salt. Like I'm new to the industry. So I recognize patterns of problems that I've solved in other industries, right? Like cancel rate, right? Like I worked in airlines, in cargo and airlines, and predicted, cancel rates or no-show rates for cargo. Well, in concrete, I recognized that right away when I started talking to producers and realizing, hey, lots of people cancel their order or they change their order a million times. And that wreaks havoc on your schedule and has massive consequences on your delivery cost. Well, it happens in airline all the time. And I'm like, well, we can solve it in airlines. Maybe we can solve it here, right? Pricing. So, all that to say that there was a lot of pattern recognition. And I was like, this could be a fun place to work, right? Lots of.
So it's interesting when Joey and I have just a little bit of inside baseball on the podcast here before for the audience. When Joey and I have a guest on, this is not the first time we've talked to him. And when we first talked to him, we have several calls where people don't end up being guests because whatever they're doing, they might just be trying to sell something or they want free advertisement or promotion, and that's not what we do here. But when we do run into somebody that has something interesting to say, even if the company's new or the idea is new, then we bring them on. I have to say that because in our first conversation together, I think my favorite thing that you said the whole time was like, even 3 years in, as someone who's a very adept at coming into new industries and trying to solve their challenges for them, you still had the humility to say, I don't totally understand this. So let me go back to something that Antonio Gracias does. He says, you know what? Okay, why do we do that? And why is this the way we do it? And he says, well, let me go see it. And he goes down and actually sees from the production line, like, oh, okay, well, hold on, why is it built this way? Oh, because that's how the materials come in. Let me go see that. Sees how the materials get in. And like, okay, well, is there a better way? Instead of working from first principles, what do we think we know, or what do we need to know that would make this absolutely true? And then just keep going back to that and drilling down and down and down. It's like, here's a problem that can be solved, and when you solve this, a lot of other dominoes just sort of fall into place. So it's interesting to hear you take that approach and come over here and say, I think I can solve these problems, but first let me make sure it's a problem. And then number two, it may be intractable, so where are those roadblocks? And then can I convince someone that this is a problem worth solving?
Yeah.
Those are all challenges that you've undoubtedly run into. I'd love to know a success story from you, actually, and the reason why I'm interested in that is because Joey and I do something similar. We have a new technology that we introduce to folks, and it's not in the digital side; it's in the admix side. And what the concrete folks will tell you is they've been approached by every fly-by-night guy working out of his garage. He's got the next greatest thing that's going to save your world, and they're just tired of it. And so for us, that was like one of the first hills we had to climb was, no, you've not heard of us, but that doesn't mean we're nobody out of our garage. Work for a great company. And it was about convincing people to give us a chance. And to do that with humility and expertise at the same time was a very, very delicate walk. So when we did have those successes in the early days, golly, they felt good. Man, they felt good. I'd love to hear about one of your early successes as you try to get folks in this space, a very conservative space, to start looking forward to the future.
Man, I'm first of all, it takes a team. So like the successes are a collective effort, right? Like we're a small team. And there's a couple of things that come to mind when I think of like our early successes. I remember we were sitting around in Austin in a WeWork, and we were like a bunch of us, and we were still like on a whiteboard. There might have been a few beers on the table, and the advantage of working at WeWork. We said, geez, like we've got to be able to connect to all these systems and like suck in the data and turn this thing on in like 4 hours. And, and then we were looking at each other and I don't remember exactly how the 4 hours came to be, but we were like, geez, there's no way you can connect to like 7 different systems and suck in all the data. And then, there's poor data quality and, turn this on in like 4 hours and, do all this analytics. Like, this is just an impossibility. We're like, no, 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 if we can do this. And when we started like our beta product and started onboarding customers, we were pretty close. Like, we were really close. Like, it only took us about 15 days. So, like, we were on the right track, and we were like, oh my god, this is never going to happen. And I remember when we got to like, I don't know, I think it was like down to a week. I think it was like, yeah, a week. We had onboarded a customer, and we got a video of this on our YouTube channel. But I love Jeff from Elmhurst Chicago Stone, so like a shout out to Jeff. And he was talking about how seamless it was, and like, easy it was to onboard onto the system, and how quickly we got the insights and so on. And we were really excited about that because it only took a few days. And today, you know, we basically in 40 minutes turn on a tenant and an instance. And assuming we've got the credentials to connect to a customer's systems, it's like, a few hours, right? And I don't think it's quite still the 4 hours, but for us, and I bring that up as something we're really proud of. It's not an overnight thing. Like, it's, we didn't just like magic, like it was a lot of hard work. But, to engineer the ability to connect to, and there's so many different systems in the industry, we're pulling in data from quality control, from batching, from telematics, invoicing, pricing, dispatch, we're calculating all kinds of stuff. And so you're bringing in all of this data, running all these analytics to try and figure out where's the customer kind of like underperforming, and to try and do all of that in a way where there's next to no IT involvement. That was really hard. And so I'm really proud of like what we've accomplished as a team to be able to do that. And, so that for us is a real success, because like when we onboard a customer, or a customer wants to even try the product, right? We can onboard them very quickly and give them an opportunity to try it and say, so we tell the customer, like, and I don't want this to sound like an infomercial, guys, because I didn't come on here to do that. But, when a customer comes on, well, we want to give them the opportunity to say, look, are you actually seeing any value, right? Is the system showing you that there's meaningful opportunities that this could help your business? Because we don't make the presumption that we're going to be a fit for everybody. We're not going to help everybody's business. Not everybody needs what we do, right? So, but if you can de-risk that for a customer and give them the opportunity to see, the numbers, right? The real, talk turkey to me, right? Like, show me the numbers. If you can do that quickly, I think you go a long way to helping perception of like, hey, if we're going to invest in digital, we can invest in something that helps us. And we can get kind of a sense of comfort, right? Because our industry is not necessarily, not everybody's had great experiences with digital technology in our industry. And so how do you help them get comfortable? Right. And so that's something that we're really proud of. And, it's not necessarily a customer success in terms of saving customer money. Like, we have those. But I think for me, that's something that's really special, because it took a lot of hard work from our team. And I think it creates a lot of value for producers that are skeptical. And it's, and I respect that skepticism.
That's all of them.
Yeah.
That's all. Hey, no, that was exactly what I was looking for, because Joey and I, when we got into the Actigel here with Active Minerals, and it was essentially we were running a startup inside of an established company. So we also went out with our beta version, and the first sales we made, we didn't even have a way to get the product into the concrete truck. All right. So some of that mixture with no way to get into the truck. So, we ended up making, certain types of bags, and had to go through a couple iterations of bag types, which was painful, and then moved to liquid. So, and that had every growing pain you could ever imagine, because we weren't admixture guys. That wasn't our background. We weren't hiring consultants. We were down there and plugging stuff in, figuring out how it works. So, I really appreciated your story and glad to hear that your team was able to overcome those challenges. Maybe one day you'll get to the 4 hour mark.
We're getting closer. From 15 days to where is a big improvement. So I'm happy
15,
with that. I'll
I
take
mean,
it. I'll
even
take the win.
15 days in my experience. So another thing, another thing that's tough for you, man. How many of these ready mix outfits even have IT people? And you're trying to come here and mess with their computer systems. That's got to be rough.
Well, and that's why we really wanted to do this. Like our thinking was, how do you make this plug and play? Right. So yeah, so we built connectors to, I don't know, today I think we can service like with pre-built connectors that basically suck the data directly out of those systems. I think we can probably service about 80% of the market in terms of, I'm talking North America, right? In terms of like the ready mix systems that people use, right? Most predominant ones. And then for the ones that we don't, like we've got an API that we can kind of bring the data in. But to your point, we recognize that most producers don't have IT. Or if they have IT, it's a lean team. Again, it goes back to my pizza analogy, right? Like if you're running a, pizza restaurant, you don't have like tons of IT people. You don't have tons of like I've never walked into a pizza restaurant and seen financial analysts sitting there in the corner crunching spreadsheets on profitability of the pizza delivery, right? So we figured there's no IT. They're pretty lean on business analysts and financial analysts. So we got to automate the living daylights out of that so that we're giving them instant value, right? It's got to be easy. Because if this turns into like, well, it's a 5-month project or a 2-month project to implement and bring in your data and starts to be not too attractive.
Well, I appreciate you finding value and the time to come on our show and share with us the lens, the view of the industry, of our industry. And you do call it our industry. I love it. Our industry, the ready mix industry, through the lens of a guy who's done it in a lot of other industries and saying that I think we can do things better. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Joey, do you have anything else for Mr. Ramy before we let him get back to his real job?
No, not really. Just like Paul said, having a quote unquote outsider's perspective, I think that's super beneficial because we can have tunnel vision pretty often in this industry. And so for somebody to come in and find things that we can improve on, that's great. I think it was very, very much needed for the industry. Thank you.
Guys, thank you so much for having me on. It's really a real pleasure. And I do say our industry, I've adopted the industry. Hopefully the industry is adopting me.
I think you're gonna do just fine. And with that, thank you once again for listening to the Add 10 Gallons Concrete Podcast. If you want to find out what Ramy Sedra is up to, just check him out at C60. Google that. It comes right up. C60 Concrete. It'll be first thing on the Google returns. Thank you, sir. Really pleasure talking to you.
Thank you guys.